So, diversity. You've seen the big four. Let's go a little deeper. So we're more diverse ethnically. I don't need to document that. You simply know that. We live that. Okay? Generational diversity is fascinating. In most religious congregations, you now have the potential of five generations. Okay? Unless you're a generationally specific community. A church that's primarily mature adults. Or adults as I have a friend who says, adults of a certain age. And of course what she means is old. But it sounds better. Or a congregation targeted at 20 or 30 somethings, an emergent type community, okay? Unless you're one of those, you probably have 5 generations present. And each generation, well, we'll do it here. How many are members of the Builder generation born before 46? Raise your hand. By the way, be proud of that because the alternative is not a good one. People say, I don't have to raise my hand. Well, raise your hand because, you know, the others, okay. Baby boomers, 46 to 60. Are you not sure about the birthdays or little dementia setting in? Like, raise your hand. Gen Xers. Well, here's the good news. As the boomers die off, your numbers will be better at workshops, all right? Or they retire. Millennials. Millennials. Anybody born since 2000 here? I saw somebody. Where is she? Oh, she's in the other room. Okay. So the I generation kids. Now here's the funny thing about generations. Each of those generations has its own personality. It's shaped in terms of how it relates to institutions, authority, relationships, how they approach work, their communication style, how they use technology. Some are actually born with it embedded, you know. Their learning style, their religious expression, and their worship style. I was doing a workshop just a couple of months back. People say, well, we need to really reinforce our worship style. I said, well, what generation are you? Oh, that was a very interesting conversation. Well, I don't want the worship style to change. I've been a member of this church since, 1842, Oh, yeah. That's good. And you will take the worship style with you to the kingdom. So we have generational diversity, and that generational diversity is a challenge for churches because each of those generations has a personality and needs some personalizing and customizing in terms of the way we think about church, worship, faith formation. And they bring different gifts. Okay? So, like, I'll pick on my generation. I was born in 1950, so now you got me anchored. When you think about baby boomers, how many churches are ready for literally the tsunami of boomers who are going to be retiring? And the potential, one group calls it the experience dividend that society is going to get as these people move into retirement, semi-retirement, blending work, retirement, grandparenting, vacationing, and volunteering. Very few churches are ready for the tsunami. Very few churches are looking at that group saying, we have grandparents, and how are we equipping grandparents to be faith formers of their grandchildren? Both their kindred grandchildren and their non-kindred grandchildren. So generational diversity, that's big. Lifespan diversity. So how many churches do you know are a 10-decade church? Not just by default. I mean intentionally in terms of ministry, faith formation. How many churches have really lifelong faith formation and don't run out of energy at 16 years old? There's so many churches that are so glad just to get through confirmation whenever they do it that they have nothing left for the next 70 years of the life cycle. So there's very few 10-decade churches that I experience that are thinking about faith formation and ministry across that whole span. But you have 10 decades. And in fact, you got a lot of these decades. I meet a lot of churches that really, they complain that they have those people. And I go, you'd rather not have them? Family. There's enough people in here who remember Ozzie and Harriet. Pull over a millennial and explain who Ozzie and Harriet were at lunch. Ozzie and Harriet were the stereotypical television family of the 1950s. Mom, dad, 2 boys, white colonial house on a Hollywood studio somewhere. All right? Ozzie even cut the grass in a suit. And we came to believe that that was the American family. But it wasn't. I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, just up the road. I still live in Connecticut. I grew up in a 3-generational household. Grandma and Grandpa lived on the 3rd floor from where they could watch everything. And every house in the neighborhood was 3 family. They were all Italians. There's nothing better in life than being Italian. Both sides. But we always had some family diversity. But that became the television family, and that by default it became, this TV show is actually a much better representation of the American family today because it reflects the diversity, modern family. We can count 10 family forms. The point of the slide is, how many churches are well positioned to address the diversity of family life? That's the point of the slide, is that we've moved from this more monolithic image of family to a very diverse family. And we used to call these things households, but they're all called families. When Pew Research asked the American public what family was, that's the list that they developed. That was the top 10. And they were all considered families. So the whole definition of family has been broadened. Now, religious diversity. The declining importance of religion and religious practice, and the declining levels of religious transmission. So, the way to read this chart is to read it like you read a thermometer or a seismic scale, you know, when you have an earthquake, all right? So it's not percentages. What this team of people did is they put together, 400 studies. And they said if we charted all of those from 1952 to 2013, this is the trend line you'll find. So the decline from like 77, 70, well, almost 80, down to the high 60s is a huge decline. It's not just 20 points, it's like 200 points. Okay? Remember, like an earthquake scale, each one represents like 10. Okay? But what's significant is you see a dip in the mid-70s, and then it kind of plateaus, and then a very steady decline starting around 1995, 96. Okay? And that this pattern, based on all the research, will continue its decline. And that's religiosity across all traditions. That's not any particular. This is like degrees on a thermometer. That's just the way they computed it. I'm just telling you what the researchers did. So it's not percentages, okay? It's degrees of decline. That's the way they looked at it. So think about temperature and degrees. You know, is 30 degrees twice as cold as, you know, it's degrees. So, or think about an earthquake, the seismic scale, how it works. What I'm pointing to is less the numbers, but the fact that you see decline, and then somewhere about the 1980s, you see that a dip, kind of levels, and then you see the steady decline, because this corresponds to exactly what you see when you're hearing things from the Pew Research Center about the rise of the not religiously affiliated. Between 2007 and 2014, the Christian share of our population dropped from 79, basically, to 70. It's a big drop in a very short amount of time. Now, the reds, you'll just notice, are the declines. Okay? Sorry, guys. But my group was right behind. And you see the only things that rose were unaffiliated, up, and non-Christian faiths, up. Okay? Now, why is that happening? Because you have generational change taking place. So, and this is why this is practical for us, because if not, they're just numbers. They don't make any sense. So let's recall this. In the 1960s, about 2/3 of all baby boomers left organized religion. 60s, 70s. About half that group eventually came back, maybe when they had children, maybe whatever. So there's still that big chunk that left. Well, if you grow up in a home of those 1/3 of boomers who never returned, you grew up in a not religiously affiliated household. And you would have seen their kids at things like Vacation Bible School, where you might have spent like a day teaching them the Our Father. Because they grew up in a home where religious transmission wasn't happening. Now, those kids grew up, and then they had kids. And what's the chance that those kids grew up in a religiously affiliated household? Small. So now you're the second generation of not religiously affiliated. So what's happening in these numbers? You'll know the silent generation or the builders, not much change there. Boomers, not much. I mean, at this point, where would you go anyway? I mean, who would have you? The Catholics are stuck with me whether they want me or not. Xers, you have a little bit, and then all of a sudden it pops in the millennials. But they are the children of what? Boomers or older Xers, many of whom grew up in what? Not religiously affiliated households. And therefore, they're not affiliating. Because transmission always works. It either works towards religious transmission or towards non-religious transmission, but you're always transmitting. Okay? So they grew up in a house that did not transmit a religious tradition. And so therefore, you start to see on this slide, that's where the bump starts. And that's where it really accelerates, because it's a multiplier effect. There's a lot of millennials. In fact, they may be as many as there are boomers, demographically. And because the sheer size of the millennials and the sheer volume of those who grew up in not religiously affiliated households, or who left themselves in their 20s, or sampled from other religions, okay, and we see that in the numbers, then you see this gradual decline in religiosity. Does that make sense? But it's profoundly generational, and it's profoundly religious transmission. Those two things. That's why when people say we're going to implement a program to address the problem of the nuns, I laugh. Because it's a generational issue. It doesn't lend itself to a program, a 6-week renewal. It's not going to do that. It's a systemic issue. So what you'll see here is 34% of the 81 to the 89 born group, 34% but look at the number of the youngest millennials. Those are people in their early 20s. And we can expect the number to do what? Keep growing. It's profoundly generational. Boomers aren't leaving. Millennials never grew up in that, and that's where the number increase comes from. So the more that non-religious participation is transmitted at home, the greater that number is going to be. And I know the headlines that you always read are, they're fed up with politics, they're fed up with religion and politics, they're fed up with gay, marriage issue, the churches being on the wrong side of that issue, et cetera, et cetera. That may all be true and a factor, but the more profound factor is generational and transmission. That's the deeper one. So this could be a case where you have kind of precipitating things and then long-term things. The long-term things are much more serious.
John, one of the places to pursue that, Vern Benson, USC, Faith and Family.
I'm going to come up with that slide in a second. Yep. So now the typical church, and by this slide, this was the Pew Research people to say, it's not just us alone charting this, so, which is true. So here's your 1992, 94, 95 right in here. Zoom. It just accelerated. So you went from about 5 to way up here, and so it just zoomed because you got the multiplier effect. It's like the 30 days of lily pads on a lake. On what day? On the 29th day, if it multiplies, on the 29th day, it goes from 50 to 100. But it takes 29 days to get there. But when it gets there, by day 30, the lake is covered with lily pads. It's the same kind of effect happening here. Once you could figure out, and this is not the only interpretation of this, once you can figure out what's going on here, you can then say, well, where's our leverage points? If we make an intervention, what will have some impact on this? So I'll give you I just want to give you a typical example from my Roman Catholic world. They're easy to pick on. There's a lot of them, and they make a lot of stupid mistakes. But we've been involved in the last 5 or 6 years on this Catholics Come Home campaign. You might have seen it. Lawn signs, ads on CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, that kind of thing, as if millennials are watching those channels. Diocese is spending $500,000, $1 million, $2 million on this campaign. I mean, we're talking real money. So who's coming back to church? You think people who are unaffiliated are going to come back if it was never... What are you coming back to? You never left. You were never a member. So you remind the active people that you should go to Mass every Sunday. But everybody else isn't even paying attention because it's not for them. I was in one diocese, they spent $500,000, and if I had $500,000 to spend on making a difference, the last thing I would do would be doing a marketing campaign. I want to create some initiatives to reach out and connect with people and get at the systemic stuff going on. So this is what's going on. So my Catholics Come Home campaign reminded people who are vibrant faith, actively engaged, that Sunday Mass is a good thing. Because they're the only ones at my age who are actually watching ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox. Unless you can figure out how to get an ad into your 13 episodes of Black is the New Orange, whatever. I mean, it's not going to work. If you can figure it out, then you can watch, we have binge come back to church ads in the midst of your binge watching for 13 hours. And you turn green at the end of it or something. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. So what this has done, it has dramatically diversified religious practice and experience in our local communities. So take it down to the bottom. Every church can be seen through these 4 lenses. The vibrant faith and actively engaged people. Well, in Episcopalians and in Roman Catholics, that group tends to skew older. They're 50 plus or 60 plus. The minimal engagement, politely known as the occasionals. You might see them 12 times a year. We're lucky. We're liturgical churches. They might actually zip in for something. Christmas, Easter, Ash Wednesday. In our tradition, Palm Sunday has gotten so darn long they don't bother with that because we read the Passion on Palm Sunday. Because they won't come to Good Friday, so we'll put the Passion on Palm Sunday. We don't read the Palm Sunday reading anymore. So we give out palms, people go, what's this for? Give out crosses. That would be better. It's the passion, all right? I'm a member of the church, so I'm in the pew and I'm thinking these things while Mass is going on. I mean, like, this is just... They're lucky I'm not a pastor. God forbid. So we have a lot of touch with occasionals, especially occasionals who are parents in the first 2 decades of life with children and teens. And you see it. People come, like for funerals, people come out of the woodwork. Heck, you guys, you go on corners and give out ashes. You know, you're on the street giving out ashes. Here comes everybody. We have touches with people throughout the year. Very few churches turn occasionals into faith formation. But you could. Spiritual but not religious and not religious affiliated, that's my big group of those, of the change. They're moving away from established religion. Spiritual but religious more connotes people who are spiritually open, but not so much for established churches. And the not affiliated are basically uninterested in what established churches. It doesn't mean they're atheists. In fact, most of the percentage of atheists in the United States is about 5%. That's what it's been since George Washington walked right past here. It's pretty much the same. That hasn't changed a whole lot. So you have this diversity of people in our congregation, and the question becomes, how do you personalize, how do you customize, how do you think about faith formation in church life through this lens? Because that does reflect these patterns. There's a generational piece to it. That's why generational diversity is important, and there's a practice piece to it.